After 35 years, Star Trek is ready to reconcile one of its worst feuds. 1,600 words. Creative editorial style. For a franchise defined by diplomacy, unity, and the ideals of cooperation, Star Trek has never shied away from conflict, on screen or behind the scenes. But among its many creative disputes, tonal clashes, casting controversies, and canon battles, one particular feud has cast a long shadow for over 3.5 decades, shaping not only how fans discuss the franchise, but how the franchise sees itself. Now, 35 years later, Star Trek finally appears ready to reconcile one of its most contentious internal rifts. The ideological divide between Gene Roddenberry's utopian vision and the more complex, morally ambiguous storytelling philosophy that emerged after his passing. And that reconciliation, slowly evolving across multiple shows, may define the franchise's future more than warp drives, new captains, or ever-expanding timelines. This isn't just a debate about creative direction. It's a struggle over the soul of Star Trek. The feud begins. Roddenberry versus the writer's room. The roots of this feud stretch back to the late 1980s during the development of Star Trek. The Next Generation. Gene Roddenberry, returning triumphantly to shepherd a new era of Trek, envisioned a bold, uncompromising concept. A future where humanity had evolved past interpersonal conflict, prejudice, greed, ego, and war. Starfleet officers were enlightened, unified, and morally steadfast. But that premise presented a problem. If characters can't fight, can't disagree, and can't make significant mistakes, how do you write dramatic television? Writers chafed under the restrictions. Stories that introduced moral flaws or individual failings were rejected. Ronald D. Moore, who would later reshape Deep Space Nine and Battlestar Galactica, frequently clashed with Roddenberry's camp, arguing that perfection made characters boring. Even Patrick Stewart struggled early on, calling Picard frustratingly rigid. Behind closed doors, tempers flared. Scripts were rewritten. Writers quit. Some were fired. The rift was so severe that by the end of the first 2 seasons, Roddenberry was largely sidelined creatively due to health issues, while producers like Rick Berman, Michael Piller, and Jerry Taylor quietly shifted TNG toward deeper emotional complexity. The feud wasn't just creative, it became philosophical. Deep Space Nine breaks the ceasefire. If The Next Generation tested Roddenberry's ideology, Deep Space Nine openly challenged it. Instead of a pristine starship exploring unknown stars, DS9 anchored itself on a damaged station, plumbing the consequences of war, genocide, trauma, politics, and religion. Characters argued, violently at times. They disobeyed orders. They questioned Starfleet. Sisko poisoned a planet. Garak and Bashir learned morality through conflict, not perfection. Many fans celebrate DS9 today as one of the franchise's richest achievements. But at the time, some saw it as an attack on Roddenberry himself. Greater Than Star Trek wasn't supposed to be cynical, they argued. It was supposed to show what humanity could become. The feud hardened into tribalism. Roddenberry purists believed Star Trek should depict utopia and progress, not humanity's flaws. Modernists argued that utopia must be tested to hold meaning. One side believed in aspirational characters. The other believed in relatable ones. Both were right, and both were incomplete. Abrams, Kurtzman, and the era of fragmentation. For a while, the feud went dormant, overshadowed by new battles. Kelvin versus Prime timelines. Purists versus blockbuster fans. Serialized versus episodic storytelling. But the philosophical divide lingered under the surface. The J.J. Abrams films embraced modern human flaws, rashness, impulsiveness, trauma. But critics argued they abandoned Roddenberry's idealism for action-heavy spectacle. Star Trek Discovery, meanwhile, attempted to merge serialized emotional character arcs with grand utopian speeches. It succeeded in ambition, but often struggled to satisfy either ideological camp. Some viewers saw it as too dark and revisionist. Others found its optimism overly theatrical. Strange New Worlds continued the pattern. Charming, episodic, hopeful, yet filled with romantic tension, trauma, consequences, and vulnerability. Not quite Roddenberry. Not quite DS9. The franchise was circling the feud but not resolving it. The turn. Star Trek begins healing its philosophical split. Over the past few years, something subtle but significant has happened. Star Trek has stopped treating its internal ideologies as mutually exclusive. Instead of choosing between utopian perfection and flawed humanity, new installments are beginning to show how the two coexist. One characters can be good and still have inner conflict. Modern Trek no longer portrays imperfections as evidence of a broken future. Instead, characters struggle precisely because they're committed to higher principles. Pike's acceptance of his fate in Strange New Worlds, Raffi's recovery arc in Picard, Burnham's internal contradictions as a leader. These aren't regressions, they're growth. The ideal isn't assumed, it's earned. Roddenberry imagined humanity already evolved. Contemporary Trek suggests we are constantly evolving. Conflict is not between egos, but between values. Duty versus compassion, safety versus freedom, exploration versus responsibility. Starfleet's ideals are finally part of the story, not just decor. Shows like Lower Decks emphasize that the utopian system exists, but characters still have personal shortcomings. The ship works because the system works. It's a compromise neither Roddenberry nor early DS9 would have embraced, yet it feels more Trek than either extreme. Why now? The world has changed. The cultural climate has shifted dramatically since 1987. When Roddenberry pushed Utopia, it was provocative optimism. When DS9 pushed moral ambiguity, it was a critique of real-world turmoil. But today, audiences are exhausted by dystopia and skeptical of blind idealism. We want hope, but we want hope that acknowledges hardship, not ignores it. In that environment, Star Trek's reconciliation isn't just artistic, it's necessary. It allows the franchise to reclaim its unique identity rather than compete with grim sci-fi on one side or nostalgia bait on the other. The new philosophy, Utopia under construction. The most meaningful shift in modern Star Trek storytelling is a simple but profound idea. Greater than humanity isn't perfect, but we're committed to becoming better. And that process never ends. This perspective reframes the feud. Roddenberry wasn't wrong about the destination. DS9 wasn't wrong about the journey. The real future of Star Trek lies in showing how we get from here to there again and again, because every generation must rediscover optimism. The result is richer storytelling where characters are flawed without betraying the future. Society is idealistic without being naive. Starfleet is aspirational without being authoritarian. This is not compromise, it's synthesis. What reconciliation looks like on screen. We're already seeing signs of this philosophical truce. Series Roddenberry idealism post DS9 complexity result. Strange New Worlds episodic optimism character-driven emotional arcs hopeful realism. Picard S3 legacy values trauma and redemption moral continuity. Lower Decks Starfleet idealism intact self-aware accountability meta evolution. Prodigy Federation as guiding force youth confronting flaws idealism taught. Not assumed. Starfleet isn't perfect. People aren't perfect. The mission is. That balance may be the most Star Trek thing the franchise has ever done. A future without sides. Most feuds in pop culture demand victors. But this one may end with neither side winning, and everyone benefiting. The real reconciliation isn't between producers or writers. It's between visions. A future worth believing in, and a path worth struggling through. Together, they create a storytelling philosophy powerful enough to guide Star Trek through its next 60 years. Not utopia frozen in glass. Not humanity mired in darkness, but light that survives because it is tested. Final thoughts. The feud wasn't a mistake. It was evolution. For decades, fans debated which era of Star Trek represented the true franchise.